and welcome to the Psych and Business Podcast, where we highlight the integration of psychology and psychological principles into the world of business and organizations. I'm your host, Dr. Ernest Wayde. My guest today is a psychological consultant with a focus on emotional intelligence and leadership, and a very interesting career path that I'm excited for him to share with us today. His name is Dr. Leonard Wysocki. Dr. Wysocki completed his PhD in psychology at the young age of 49 years old after a 20-year career in business human resource management in Fortune 500 companies, where he moved from supervisor roles to vice president positions. He made this change because he saw very bright leaders making very bad mistakes, leading to their losing their jobs because of them. Now he works through coaching to help leaders avoid those pitfalls. Len, welcome to the show.
Hi. How you doing, Ernest?
Len, I'm really glad you decided to come on the show, and you have such an interesting career. I really want to hear more about your path and your story. Tell us about your experiences as an HR manager and how that work influenced your pursuit in advanced education in psychology.
Well, it's kind of a short story. I started off thinking that HR was going to be what I did for the rest of my life. And I had done a master's degree back in the late 70s, and I worked for U.S. Steel and a few other Fortune 500 companies, aerospace, Pratt & Whitney, whatnot. And I started to see a trend, regardless of what industry I worked in, whether it be aerospace or advertising or banking or steel or nuclear manufacturing. And it was pretty much the same. It was essentially what you just said. Very smart individuals who were individual contributors who moved up the ladder and whose corporations felt that they would be great managers or directors or vice presidents. And because they lacked emotional intelligence and a lot of common sense in managing people, they ended up making very severe mistakes, which ultimately, many times got them fired. And unfortunately,
What kind of mistakes are you talking about?
mistakes in managing people, in not understanding particular situations, pushing on quantitative measurement rather than understanding them as human beings, lacking compassion, lacking empathy when it was important for them to do so. And then I became, after I got my doctorate, I worked teaching at the university level in the MBA program and also the industrial organizational psychology graduate program. And I found that, my boss was typical of a person who really invested in me. He was what we call a servant leader. And as a result of that, I would do somersaults for him. I would do anything he requested of me because I knew that he wanted to develop me. And that was the key that actually, what I learned in emotional intelligence and working at University of Connecticut during my doctorate. And I was very lucky at the time to work with Peter Salovey, who's currently the president of Yale University, on a measurement tool that actually measures and gauges emotional intelligence. And the empathy and the compassion and the ability to understand the person, to develop the person, was the key for motivation as far as I was concerned. And my own personal experience and my professional experience working with executives.
Yeah, so that sounds like a really interesting story, Lynn, especially first getting the experience of what not to do, right? Watching some of these executives and seeing the mistakes that they were doing. I love the examples you mentioned, lack of empathy and caring about your people. And then you had the opportunity to actually see an example of how it should be done in your mentor, right? And that really led you to continue to pursue this in psychology. Am I phrasing that correctly?
Pretty much so. Yeah, I can't take credit for being sought after. I was sought after by some consulting companies while I was teaching graduate school, and I realized that I was able to utilize my doctoral work and especially my focus on emotional intelligence in my coaching for the past 15 years. Emotional intelligence, working with different executives, primarily at this point with pharmaceutical industries. I found it to be very correct and very rewarding in a two-way situation in the coaching gratification that comes from seeing people grow.
So let's talk a little bit more about the work that you do now, Lynn, because I know you work with executives through coaching. How do you use coaching to help these leaders avoid some of these mistakes that you've seen them make in the past?
Well, it kind of goes back to to becoming a trusted leadership advisor, where I had originally met you. I was with
Mm-hmm.
one medical doctor for about 12 years, and we got to a point where he would bring scenarios to me. And this happens also in my short-term coaching engagement, say 6 months, eight
Mm-hmm.
months, where the leader brings a particular complex situation with an employee, a subordinate of his or hers. And as a
Mm-hmm.
result of that, they have an ability to have a non-judgmental professional to bounce these ideas off of. How should I go in? How should I respond? In this kind of thing. And what I found is that having somebody who you trust as a coach or even as a close comrade in your profession allows you to see a situation from more than one perspective, and this enables
Hmm.
them to become a better leader.
Hmm. So, I mean, these are well-seasoned leaders who have years of experience, but they're coming to you for that behavioral aspect, right? They're coming to you to figure out their behavioral side.
Typically, they have a tremendous amount of experience in their field, and it enables
Mm-hmm.
them to be a mentor to subordinates who are working in a very highly technical field. However,
Mm-hmm.
necessarily have as much experience in management, in coaching, in
Mm-hmm.
being able to drive to get work done through the people. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I found this to be true in all industries I've worked in manufacturing and aerospace and banking, advertising. And it's when push comes to shove, it's really about understanding what motivates the individual. Every individual is different, and the motivation
Mm-hmm.
it takes to work with one individual may be different from another. And to be able to be a good listener and to employ the opportunity to utilize their emotional intelligence to pick up on various cues that come from
Mm-hmm.
coordinates gives them the opportunity to become a servant leader. And I use that term because I think that is truly the best way to manage really bright people who are motivated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've talked about servant leadership previously on this show in one of the episodes, and I that's one of my favorite leadership approaches. It sounds like you're also talking about helping these leaders understand how to recognize different aspects of emotional behavior, right? Because we're talking about emotional intelligence on the part of the leader, really to be able to better understand the people that they're working with. Talk to us a little bit about why you think that's really important for the leader to be able to understand those things to improve their leadership
I
abilities.
think it's crucial for a leader to understand those things for the purpose of motivating the individual to work hard, to continue to work
Hmm.
hard, and to see the connection between working hard and their own physical and psychological development.
Hmm.
Because we all have various levels of motivation, and what typically motivates us the most, and what the research tells us, is that the breadth of decision making and understanding motivates people to work harder. Uh, and
Hmm.
this has been done in several studies over the years. And the ability to understand the person's what really makes the person tick from a developmental point of view allows the leader to become more aware of how to motivate the individual, the subordinate.
Hmm.
And that's what's so crucial. And that's what so many executives who are very intellectually smart don't necessarily have at their uh, as a repertoire of behaviors that they could use.
Yeah, that's a really astute observation you're making there. I think one of the things that you said that really resonated with me was these are leaders with years of experience in their field, but very little management experience. They don't have the years of experience and training understanding human behavior and people. And so the point you're making here, as I'm hearing it, is it's really important to understand the people that you're working with so that you can understand what
Ex-
motivates them. Am I capturing that correctly?
exactly. That's exactly true. And it's taken me half of my lifetime to figure this out. Uh, I actually focused on it in my doctoral work because I needed the credentials in order to teach this. And I was
Hmm.
really teaching this within the graduate school, both in the MBA program and the IO Psych program, because it's so important for these future leaders in
Hmm.
business to understand what it takes to become good managers, directors, and vice presidents.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you focused on this as part of your research. And one of the things that I know you've researched is emotional intelligence and executive work-life balance. Can you share a little bit about that research? Because I think that's really interesting because it's hard for anybody to manage work-life balance, especially executives.
Well, it's especially difficult today with the new Generation Z, and the fact that they've witnessed personally their parents and their grandparents do 30, 40, 50-hour work weeks, and then unfortunately, because of business turns, lose their career or get laid off, and
Hmm.
they've learned from witnessing this that they're going to strive to become independent and to find a work-life balance. Uh, but
Hmm. Hmm.
they actually witnessed their parents or grandparents not having done that. So it's more incumbent, most incumbent more than ever, for leaders to be able to understand and to develop their people, to give them the motivation to stay at the job.
Hmm.
Because today, my own sons, are quick to move because they realize that, it's more about them than it is about the companies they work for.
Hmm.
Because they can, if they have enough on the ball and they have enough credentials, they can move around from different companies and find that good manager that they're really looking
Hmm.
to do the long haul with. People don't leave their jobs; they leave their managers.
Mm. I love that saying. People don't leave their jobs; they leave their managers. Len, you've done a lot of work coaching executives and leaders. Can you give us an example of where you've helped a leader improve their emotional intelligence so that they can help, the population that we're talking about here stay in the organization and be committed to the
Yeah,
organization?
I can give you an example of a vice president I've worked with. I just finished working with recently after about a year. And this individual, obviously, I can't name specific companies or names for confidentiality purposes, but I can tell you that this vice president was very, very smart and had a very unique position in this pharmaceutical industry. And he uh, had a tendency culturally to actually uh, lean in. What I mean by
Hmm.
that is to basically be a micromanager, because he was so good
Mm.
at what he did in his own particular field that he would train by literally doing the person's work, and this would alienate a lot of his subordinates, especially his peers. Not so much his subordinates, but his peers, who were not afraid to tell him when to back off. Uh, what I
Hmm.
taught him how to do was to lean with, and I'm taking the terms from another individual, Carol Kaufman, who wrote a book, Real Time Leadership, who I really think very highly of, to show that it's not all my thinking. I sometimes use the different leaders I work with at the city that
Hmm.
I come from to kind of understand how to put rhetoric or terminology to actual behavioral terms, so people
Hmm.
understand how to change their attitudes or their behaviors. In this case, Carol came up with leaning in, leaning with, and not leading at all. And I basically sent him an article from this book that basically said you need to learn how to back off and not lean in as much as you're doing. And these are the behaviors I want you to practice. I kind of
Hmm.
call it cognitive behavioral coaching, because
Hmm.
it requires homework and practice, because these are default behaviors that are not given they're not part of the repertoire of behaviors that most executives have. They have to relearn them. Once
Hmm.
this fellow did, he became a much better manager, much better vice president, and became more acceptable to his peers.
Yeah, I love that example that you're giving there, and I'm gonna jump on the phrase that you mentioned there, cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive coaching, which I'm assuming comes from cognitive behavioral therapy, which is one of my science as well, therapeutically. Talk to us about how you were able to adapt what we call CBT essentially into cognitive behavioral coaching. I think that's such an interesting
They're
approach.
very similar. They're very, very similar. And there's also a DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, which I'm getting certified in now, which is an offshoot of cognitive behavioral therapy. And The premise behind CBT and how it really plays out in cognitive behavioral coaching is almost identical in that you're dealing with a different population of executives and managers and directors and vice presidents, but people are people. And the whole idea
Mm-hmm.
is that if you don't have a repertoire of behaviors as part of your default position, is what you've learned in your adulthood or in your childhood, then you tend to carry that, whatever you've learned, on into your
Mm-hmm.
and also into your management styles. And
Mm-hmm.
to understand emotional intelligence and to be able to utilize it in servant leadership, you basically want to be able to understand that you must practice these new behaviors, even if they're alien to you, because it's the right thing to do. It's what people expect from you. It's why they will work hard for you, and it's worth doing.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it's I mean with CBT as you're describing it, it's really about firstly recognizing what your natural tendency behaviors are and then understanding how those may be helpful or harmful in the business environment and then identifying those behaviors that you need to really lean on whether you have them naturally or things that you need to, as you say, develop and
Yeah,
practice to make sure that you're then helping your employees able to do their work better.
correct.
I love that approach, Lynn.
Yeah, that's very right.
Yeah. I love the way that you're helping leaders. The phrase that you said, you're helping leaders avoid some of those mistakes that very smart individuals are able to make. Even right, I think what you've described there is the distinction between the IQ and the EQ. Right, talk to us a little bit about some of that difference there.
Well, it's not. It's something that was only discovered less than 10 years ago, and Mayor in Salve was working on it, and a fellow by the name of Coleman actually wrote it up, and it became famous because of his editorial comments. He is a psychologist, and he was a editorial person in, I believe, the New York Times. I could be wrong on that, but the fact that it became popular, it became a behavior that is becoming more important as we go on in the technological age, where things
Mm-hmm.
like AI and we become more technologically astute, but we lose the fact that we're still human beings.
Mm-hmm.
People
Mm-hmm.
respond to other people within business, and they are a vital component to the success of the business. And, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why coaching is so important now, probably more important than ever, to do it correctly and to provide these leaders with, whether they be supervisors or part of the C-suite, with the critical EQ behaviors and understanding of how it is to lead people to do business
Mm-hmm.
that they're familiar with. And that particular component is not a competency that is well understood in my experience by business.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that's something that's not well appreciated, and I think as one of my colleagues has mentioned, it's not a soft skill; it's a hard skill because it's a hard thing to get people to recognize and to develop. Lynn, I know that you do coaching and you have an approach and you use testing in your approach when you do coaching. Walk us through how you use testing and how you integrate that to help people develop their EQ.
Well, what I do typically when I work with my executives, even my directors, for that matter, even managers, I try to jumpstart the process by providing them with several psychometric devices or tests. Uh, and, you know,
When you say psychometric, explain to us what that
well,
means for
what that
the
means
audience.
is like I don't want to use the commercial names because I'm not trying to put a plug in for them. Uh,
Hmm.
for instance, when I was doing my dissertation, I became certified in the Mesquite, the Meyer-Salovey Caruso Emotional Intelligence Test. I'll actually say that one because it's where I got my start. Uh, Peter
Hmm.
Salovey, who was part of the person who created this instrument, uh, he did so to measure people's native emotional intelligence as a test, and it's the only one of its kind. So to answer your
Hmm.
question, I use that along with a couple other devices like the Hogan, and I have to kind of say them by name to give as much of a total picture of the variance of behavior that's used by the current executives. It's what they say about
Hmm.
themselves. So I start.
And that's important for you as well as for the
Yeah,
executive to see that, right?
it is
Hmm.
because it's in black and white. It gives them an understanding of how they operate as human beings and how they lead other human beings. That
Mm-hmm.
becomes the
Mm-hmm.
basis from which we move towards objectives within the coaching arena.
Yeah. So when you do those psychometric assessments, do you find that generally the executives appreciate that insight, or do they push back? How do they usually respond to
Well,
that?
it typically they see it as facts, as something they said about themselves, so it's difficult to dispute. And
Mm-hmm.
typically it's measured against, it's usually a valid and reliable measurement that takes hundreds and thousands of people from across the world and how to measure
Mm-hmm.
up against them based on the certain criteria that's being measured. And it's difficult to dispute. So typically they understand and they accept it because it is almost, it's like a test. It is,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak. And it's great because it gives us a starting place of where they are behaviorally and what they need to do to move into an area where they become more productive.
Mm. Yeah, Len, I really appreciate you giving us this insight into the psychometrics of the assessments that you use there. I think it's really important for the audience and for leaders to understand what are these tests that that we ask them to take, and how does it help them? How does it help us better understand them? So I really appreciate you pulling back the curtain there, as one of my other colleagues has
Well, that's
mentioned.
okay. Yeah, that's what I do, and it saves time too.
Yeah. Yeah, Lynn, we could chat for for a long time, but I want to be respectful of time, and I know you do great work. So, how do people contact you if they want to get your services or continue the conversation with you?
The fastest way to contact me is through my website, and it's just Leonard Wysocki, PhD. Uh, and
Hmm.
if you do that, you'll come up to a website, and there's a podcast on there as well as video examples of what I do and how I do it. And there's a form
Hmm.
on there to actually contact me. So it's literally my name plus phd.com. Uh, and
Awesome.
that's a website that I use, on all my emails, and I use on the web for people to actually reach out to me if they would so choose.
Great. And then, Lynn, I like to take advantage of the experts that we have on the show and ask, what's a piece of advice that you'd give to business leaders in this environment now that we're in?
The simplest, most direct piece of advice I would give is, and I can't take credit for this, it's do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It comes from a proverb it comes from a much wiser person than myself. But it's essentially, you know, every time you give a command or you give a directive, people see something coming from their bosses as a rule, and they tend
Hmm.
to have a reaction to it, but they typically do it until it's time that they feel that they need to leave. So
Hmm.
before that happens, they should actually think about how would I react if I was given this directive,
Mm.
and that would hopefully that would give them pause to think about whether it's appropriate or not to use.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that advice. It sort of reminds me of the golden rule, right? Treat others as how you would want to be treated, and I think that's
Exactly.
such an important thing for all of us to remember, especially because sometimes in the heat of the moment, as you mentioned with emotional intelligence, if you aren't used to those behaviors, that encourage you to stop and to think, you may behave rashly, and I think that keeping in mind that do unto others as you'd want to unto yourself is really important.
Yeah, and to keep in mind the fact that also we don't know what we don't know. So this is where
Hmm.
coaching becomes very important. If a person is not able to understand through their own reflection the best way to use developmental efforts such as empathy or compassion, then their coaching
Hmm.
would help them. Uh, and
Hmm.
that's what I found to be true with many of my clients who are very smart, who come from different backgrounds and in diversity in manufacturing, aerospace, pharmaceutical industries, etc., who are not reinforced because of their emotional intelligence, but are reinforced instead
Hmm.
because of what they know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that's such a key point, right? Just it's just so important to remind all of us that we are a confluence of our behaviors, of our experiences, and all of those things play into how we behave, how we act in any given moment. And so, just just bringing that to the forefront and helping us all to try to be more mindful of that, right? Just not for ourselves, but for other people as well. I think it's such important work. I appreciate the work that you're doing.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, Lynn, thanks for coming on the show. It's been so much fun, and I really appreciate you pulling back the curtain and sharing with us some of the really great stuff that you do. And I really love your career path. That's such a great set of experiences that you had.
Well, the good thing for me is that it makes me want to go forward at this point in my career where I'm actually working finally for myself at an advanced age.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks for listening. And to our listeners, we hope that you will join us next time.